Hey, it's Alan Ferguson. Welcome to this episode of Pipeline to Profitability, episode number 46. Today I have a friend, a colleague, someone that's been on the podcast before. I think it might have been episode 11. I've been on Matt's podcast, the Site Shed. So today I have Matt Jones, all the way from Australia, no longer in Sydney. And Matt is the founder and director of Tradie Web Guys, the Site Shed. We met basically from plumbing. We're both plumbers. And welcome, Matt. You might like to expand on a little bit of your accomplishments and what you do. And then we can get in and throw some gold nuggets at our listeners, right?
Sure. Well, mate, thanks for having me back on your show. I suppose it's fair to apologise to all of the North American listeners again, because you're going to get some pretty heavy, funny accents coming at you. So essentially we met through the plumbing game, but we've been mates for a long time now, and I suppose since a lot's changed since when we met. You were running the Omega Plumbing franchise or group back then, and I was working in a job which I left to set up a digital agency. So Tradie Web Guys is essentially, we do websites and marketing for trade businesses, and a lot of the stuff we do over there is stems from laying the right foundations, which we'll get into in a little bit.
Yeah.
Off the back of that, I suppose I was doing a lot of educational based like presentations and things like that at TAFE New South Wales, and at representing the trades at the Department of Education roundtable events down in Canberra and things like that, which was really cool. But it was very well received, except the problem was there was very few people in that room, and more to the point, very few people that actually really gave a toss. So I thought, these things that we're talking about here are important. How do we get it out to the masses? So in 2016, I started the Site Shed podcast, which, as you mentioned too, you've been on one or two times, I think. And we're up to episode 370 or something like that now over the...
Wow.
Yeah, so that sort of just grew from one thing to the next. And here we are. Now I moved out of Sydney, as you mentioned, up on the east coast of Australia in what's pretty much paradise, and with two little kids, and it's good.
Fantastic, Matt. And I just want to say, as a friend and as an admirer of what you've done, congratulations on your success and your passion for the industry as mine. I mean, both of us we come from humble beginnings as plumbers, and we're both very passionate about what's best for the industry. And I've devoted a large part of my life, or at least the last 20 years, in trying to grow the industry. And one thing, I remember a podcast you did, or you've talked about, maybe as something we've discussed, is from where we both started to where we are now. And my life has taken a massive turn in the last few years. And I'm finally doing something, not that I didn't love running a plumbing, electrical, air conditioning business with 100 staff, but I really love the coaching and the teaching, and just and I'm really starting to take an interest in the software side of the industry too, with my connection with Billy Stevens, Sira Software. And but so probably to give the value to our listeners, I would like to start with marketing, because everyone wants to know more about marketing, right? And so I'm probably going to throw this at you, and you'll go, well, it's basic stuff, but how important is a good website and a good, to the success of a trade service business, plumbing, electrical, air conditioning?
Well, funnily, what we've seen lately with the, recent introductions of things like, pixels being taken away from the conglomerates like Facebook and that kind of stuff. We've seen an interesting segue with the power shift being put back into the hands of business owners, which, of course, if you were extremely leveraged and exposed direct, with any one avenue like Facebook, at any point in time, then you really felt that crunch, when Apple's all of a sudden said, well, we're not going to let you pixel our clients without their permission and all this kind of stuff. A lot of businesses suffered from that. But again, it sort of put a bit of perspective back into the individuals and the businesses where they were like, well, actually, we can take a bit of this power back now, and we can own our space here a little bit more. And a lot of that, so that conversation never really went away, but it kind of got swept under the rug for a long time, because people, I mean, you know what it's like. You just get so dependent on Google ads, or you get so dependent on, your SEO. You get so dependent on any one stream of, I suppose, like, when you've got something that's working quite well, you kind of get dependent on it, and the other things sort of get neglected, which it doesn't really fulfill the ecosystem that you need when you're running a business to make you sort of sustain through these ups and downs. And so now the shift has gone back to what it kind of used to be as well, where it's like, well, you own and control your website. You don't own and control Facebook. You don't own and control Google, but you certainly have the ability to, use your website as, we call it a marketing launchpad. Treat it as a marketing launchpad. It should be a living, breathing, organism that evolves with your business and helps you tell your story. And, we live in this space now, especially off the back of this wonderful COVID pandemic that's swept everywhere in the world except Texas.
Good to catch up, by the way.
Yeah, it was good to see you the other week. But the thing is, people now are very interested in your story. They're interested in who you are, what your business does, your relationships. They like to see a face on the website. They like to see the team members that are coming to their home. They like to understand what you do, who you do it for, where you do it, why you do it, and how you do it, and your website gives you the ability to communicate these things. And so much of what we do today now within the agency, although of course we still, we run ads and you do the SEO stuff and we do, Facebook, but we don't do any of that stuff until the foundations have been laid. And when we lay those foundations, typically we're making sure that their website enables them to tell their story the best possible way, the best possible way, and in a way that reflects the caliber of the business. So that's a really defining way that you can stand out from your competitors, because when you go on to, I mean, we get this all the time, especially with our North American clients. Like there's people that'll, they when they fill in their forms and they link to competitors of theirs, like their websites are just horrible, and there's no face to the website. There's no personality behind it. There's no one representing the company. It's just like, back in the day, there was this thing where it was like, well, we want to appear as big as we can, so we're not going to, we're not going to put a face on the website. We want to really appear like we're a huge company. And now you see the interesting shift where the big companies are going back to, no, actually, we want to look like a small company because we know people will engage with that better. And and even up with 70, 100 staff, you probably had some sort of experience with that. Like that whole shift from going from, no, we want to look as big as we can, to no, we actually want to go back to looking like, we're a small business which has a personal touch with our customers. And so the caveat is, of course, it's very hard for an agency or anyone for that matter to, I mean, there's things that we can do in terms of heavy lifting, building websites and doing all the back end marketing kind of things. But then, at some point, the business owner or somebody within the business, needs to champion the fact that we need, you need photos, you need videos, you need testimonials, and you need all these kind of things. So it sort of starts blurring the line with, okay, we need to update some of our processes to make sure that, when we're going out on jobs and we're doing the things that we do every day, that we are capturing the data and capturing the information that we need in order to, make sure that we can, tick our box when it comes to the job management tools we're using, but also tick the box when it comes to how we're going to market what we do looking forward. So that's been a really interesting shift, and it's well received. Of course, it's something that as business owners, as trade business owners, we don't necessarily always A, want to do, and B, understand that we need to do. But again, like you said before, part of the education process and the evolving landscape of being a business owner is at some point in time, you do need to take one hat off and put another one on. And that's just the reality.
Absolutely. Look, anything I have to say about websites, I can't say it was ever my area of expertise, but I did know what I wanted a website to do. One thing, and we've had many conversations about this particular subject, and I don't want to go in say anything good or bad about the companies that I've used, but a good website does make the difference. And you've touched on a few things in regards to the foundations of the company. And today it's changed so much, and especially in the last, I suppose, 5 years, where reviews count. Social is such a big part of it, and you've got to have that overall strategy in place for the correct branding of your business, and to let the world know what is it you really do. I mean, I work with companies over here in the US that have massive brands in, say, air conditioning, and they want to get into, but drains and plumbing. Well, I say, well, you don't want to look like an air conditioning business that's adding a drain division, because that's not going to give you the desired effect. You want to have a clearly branded drain division or plumbing division. One thing I want to say is, when it comes to Google, it's a monopoly. AdWords, we spent way too much on that. And the reason we spent way too much on Google AdWords is because we didn't really have all the other processes in place. And something I've learned from Joe Cunningham is, he's got an air conditioning business here in Houston that doesn't really rely too much on websites or Google or anything. Most of his work is generated via existing customers and all the internal process, And one thing I used to love that we did well was, and one of the things we're going to segue into is talking about the difference between our Australian companies that we work with and the American companies we work with. And for those that actually spend a lot of time in the US, there's a big difference in certain areas of how the business is run. So, but I wanted to start off with that because I feel a good website is important, but it's changed a lot. And there's so many other things that sort of expands into now, isn't it? And
so, yeah, and you've touched on something here, which we're going to move into, because the two foundational products that we typically build out for our clients is the website, as we've discussed, and the website, again, in a way that helps them tell their story better, not just a okay, I'm getting a website because my competitors have one, like actually getting one and building a bit of a culture into, making sure that people are using it to their advantage, because it shouldn't be a static thing. It should be something that evolves, and you want it to evolve, because now we have the ability to do these amazing things like split testing, and it becomes a game now of, well, okay, it's not so much a traffic question in a lot of cases. It's a conversion conversation. So how do we improve the conversion of the traffic we're already getting, which means we don't need to be spending any more money to generate any more leads. We just need to make our websites convert, 2% better, which could be 100% better overall, right? So, the little things like that. The other thing that we put a huge amount of attention to these days is, the whole conversation around, customer nurturing, automation, and more importantly, lead capture. Because most businesses, and truthfully, I would say 99% of the businesses we speak to, don't have a proper lead capture or lead management system in place. And so we've got the hub now, which we launched, about a year ago, which we've customized specifically for trade businesses, which is a lead management system which can take a contact right through that super important sales pipeline, from the point where they become a contact, right through all the different stages, whatever that looks like. And you can apply automations and email marketing and, landing pages, and you can do all this kind of stuff within the one tool. Now, this has been really powerful, because until that point, we would have, so many of our customers that would have their websites connected to their, their job management tool, their Simpro, their Arrowflow, no, very few of them actually would use a CRM, to be honest. I suppose the hub is also CRM, but the point is, you don't want your job management tool cluttered up with just contacts. You want your job management tool filled with jobs, with actual clients, So you want to be able to nurture that lead from the point where they've come in contact with you up to the point where they become a client and then beyond, and so many businesses don't have that. And so there's a real, if I can stress one big thing to, the listeners and viewers out there, it's the power of your database in today's landscape. And actually, that's your advantage, and you've so often we see businesses that will, just spend all this money on lead generation at the cost of neglecting these existing contacts that they've got, which is an insane equation when you look at it from a numerical value. Because you could probably attest to the fact that you're 8 times more likely to retain a client based on the fact you've done a good job than you are to, convert a cold lead. So, I think there's just that paradigm shift within, that needs to be communicated to business owners out there in the space of, if you're going to spend the money to generate the lead, then capture it and nurture it. Don't let it go to waste at the cost of more leads.
Yeah. Well, we have a common friend of interest where you used to work for a few years, and Scott spends a fair bit of time in the US, and we both play in the same best practice groups. But that's one thing I observed with his business is he's modeled most of the American companies, the really successful American companies that I now work with, and he's modeled them in the way they deal with their customers, the way they communicate, everything. It's at an all new. It's at a lot higher level to the majority of service companies within Australia. So, look, I'd just like to throw this one at you, and I put you on the spot a bit. And as a very successful podcaster, I want your view on how important, or if it's important at all, is your average service company to have their own podcast channel?
I'd probably say it's a bit of a waste of time, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And look, the reason being is that, it depends on the goals of the business. But typically speaking, you got to look, whenever you do any sort of marketing, you've got to be reaching out and speaking specifically to an avatar, and if your avatar is, residential homeowners, are you, that live in a certain area, specifically if you're a service business, I don't know if a podcast would be the right tool for that. So and this is why we encourage our clients. It's not like the best thing that we, the best form of content that we find that works very well and actually gets a lot of saturation because there's very little noise in that space is things like video content. And for context, you look at my business, like we're a digital agency, you go onto YouTube and it is full of, people from the digital space, websites, marketing, giving tips and all this kind of stuff, right? Like it's very hard to get traction in that space. But if you're a builder or if you're a plumber or if you're an electrician, there's very few people that are doing that well. So there's this golden opportunity there to really own that space as the expert in ABC, especially within a region or in a location, which does get a lot of impact. And because it's new and people are actually looking for these things. So I would say that, and the good thing about a video is as well, like this, for example, you're going to take this and you'll turn this into an audio podcast. And then you'll take this video and then you'll stick it on a page on your website and you'll embed the video and you'll have the audio link in there. And then you'll go chop it up and syndicate it across social media. So there's so many things that you can do with a video content that enables you to really leverage it and, I suppose get as much saturation you can out of that. I think podcasting definitely has its place. And I think if you've got a really specific, audience and there's people there that want to, that need help with certain things, then it's a good idea. But I'm not sure if like mums and dads are going to be tuning into a podcast on plumbing.
I'm with you. I'm actually, the reason I threw that at you is I've got a guest next week. Jim Clark's his name. He actually looks after our podcast. He also does podcasts. His primary business is podcast for tradespeople. He looks after a fella by the name of Tommy Mello from A1. And I'm just curious if that is a good way to move forward. I'll move on to the next segue or the next.
Well, I mean, I think in fairness though, like if you look at someone like Tommy, like he's sort of at that point where the business runs himself, and he's moving into the education space now. Like he's written books, and he does all this sort of stuff, right? So he's not your average contractor, if you will.
No, he's not your average contractor. And I'm going to get him on the podcast. I've been on his podcast, which was long. So I try to keep this podcast short. So
don't worry about the length, Al. Don't worry about it. Just let it roll.
That's not what I hear. Don't worry about the length. Yeah, I'll move on.
What you do?
I could see where your mind was going there, my friend. So, how different is the US service? This is an area that I'm fascinated in. How different is the US market to the Australian market? Now, you spend time in the US. We just caught up a couple of weeks ago in Houston. Good time, by the way. Thank you. And that's where I'm based now. So you work with contractors in the US, as do I, and I work with contractors in both. How different is the US market in the industry that we're in compared to Australia?
Funnily enough, it's as different as the businesses are, as different as the I think the obvious things like the language and some of the semantics around that.
Americans do talk funny, don't they?
Yeah, they've got this weird accent, and but the reality is, I think for the better part, like and again, just taking it back to like foundations, they're not that different. The things that businesses around the world need to really dial in are, well, first of all, we need to make sure that the website represents the caliber of the business we are. It speaks to our avatar. It speaks to, it lets people know what we do, where we do it, why we do it, who we do it for. And, and it's something that we can use as a way to, display jobs that we've done and showcase the work that we've done and, so on and so forth. So that's pretty common around the world. From the marketing point of view, again, like there's some differences in, some of the platforms, I suppose, that people would use in the space of reviews and things like that. But again, typically we see, you've got your SEO, so your organic search engine results, which, in truth, I think it's probably better in the US because the thing that I find in the US with a lot of clients is because there's, you look at service businesses, right, that operate within a location, because there's just so many more people within that live in the US than they do in Australia. You find that like people can like plant a flag in a location and just have access to a huge market. And so it's kind of refreshing when you've got, businesses that want to own a certain area, because like it makes it easy to optimize and dial in the marketing for those location-based keywords. So yeah, it's interesting. You'd think it could be like a little bit more challenging, and sometimes it is, but we tend to find that we get like the results from things like SEO actually happen quicker when we're dealing with our North American clients for some reason. So
interesting. One thing you'd love working with the American clients is if you get paid in US dollars, it's good, right? But look, the biggest thing that I've noticed, not just from living here, but also from dealing with hundreds of companies in the US, I find there's a few exceptions to the rule, but I find the majority of the companies provide a whole higher level of service. And I think that's important. They have all of the companies. I mean, don't forget, I work with probably the top 1% of the industry over here, which is still a lot of contractors. They have seriously high retention rates, and they do. I mean, the level of service just seems to be that much better. So that's the one thing that I've noticed, Matt. And
I think in general, like there's a higher expectation for service. I think we just spoke about this at dinner the other night. You know, like there's you go from, you know, the restaurant that we went to in Houston there, when you go back, you know, to Sydney, and you go out for dinner at a restaurant, and you just feel like you're being neglected. You know, like I think generally there's a better emphasis on a higher emphasis, or it's better on service across the entire nation. You know, in the US. And that's probably as a result of, you know, a number of different things, including the fact that, you know, gratuity is a big thing, you know, in the US, and it's bred into every sort of level of business, you know, from cafes right up to big business, you know. So
not so much in the service industry. There's not as much tipping because it's not really expected, but that level of service does come from service, you know, restaurants and that it seems to carry through in the culture. But that's my observations. Yeah, I have to say, this is a really interesting place, and I friggin' love it.
It is.
It's amazing.
And what I love about you know, what I really love about America is there seems this. It doesn't matter where you go, there seems to be this polite, almost innocence with just the way that people are towards each other, which doesn't really, I find, exist back in Australia. You know, like we're, you know, walking down the street with a baby in the pram, and there's a fellow across the road who's leaf blowing, and he stops what he's doing because he doesn't want to, you know, like, and then he waves at us and he says hello, and you know, I feel like in Australia people just keep doing what they're doing, and they wouldn't really care, you know, or just turn their headphones up. And
there is a higher level, I find, especially in Texas, where you can carry a gun. There is a higher level of respect, and I've noticed that, like, not just in Texas, but some of the left states as well. But people are very respectful over here, and it's not what a lot of the Australians think. It's a really great place that people are friendly. So just we'll round up in a second, Matt, and I thank you again for joining me. Is there any book that you're attached to at the moment? Maybe with your vacation, you're on the plane. Is there something, a really good book that you're reading at the moment that you might like to recommend to our listeners?
Oh man, I'll tell you what, like, I am so heavily invested in books all the time. The one that and this sort of gives you a bit of context as to how invested I have been in this one. There's one called Predictable Revenue by Aaron Ross, which is this one here. And if the if the sticky notes all over it and the highlighters through it don't give you any indication of how good this book is, I thoroughly encourage you to check this out.
Fantastic. Is there one takeaway or several takeaways from that book that you would recommend?
Well, I mean, this book was written by the guy who essentially turned Salesforce into $100 million business, and the whole premise of the book is how to create predictable recurring revenue within your business. So I would definitely encourage that. And the other book that I have been getting right into lately is a book called The Debt Millionaire. And again, this has probably been the best book I've ever read in my life.
Is that, it's not like a Grant Cardone sort of a
No, actually, this book is about how to leverage debt to become wealthy. So this is not really a business book, but it's a definitely an education book that's life changing.
Well, so Matt, I'm going to get both of those books because I'm an avid reader. I tend to read and listen, but thank you for the recommendations there. And thank you again for joining me. This has been fantastic. Definitely want to get you back. And yeah, really good to see you. And I'm sure we'll stay in contact, and say hi to anyone that you see that I haven't seen for a while. But I'm coming back down under in July for grandson number 2. And
that's right. Congratulations.
Yeah, if we catch up, we catch up. If not, you got to love this Zoom way of connecting to everyone. So thanks again, Matt. Thanks for everyone for joining me on this very special episode of Pipeline of Profitability podcast, sponsored by Service Success Academy. Cheers, Matt.